Is the EU worth it? I don't know. People assume that the EU is just one thing, but it's actually at least four different things. First thing that it is a free trade agreement, like NAFTA, for example, which just says that two countries are not gonna add any additional layers of bureaucracy or taxes or all that to commerce in between those countries. The second thing that it is a customs union, which is pretty much like saying, okay, we're not gonna tax each other's products, but we're definitely gonna tax other people's products and other countries' products, and we're going to tax it at the same rate so that we're competitive worldwide, or at least that's what they claim. The third thing they use about is the four freedoms. So those are probably the freedoms that everyone associates when they think of the EU. The freedom of movement, the fact that there are no borders, the freedom of labor, the fact that any citizen of any country can work in another country and live in another country as well, and obviously the freedom of service and the freedom of capital and the freedom of products. So you can just literally act as if you were in one single market. There's also the political and monetary union. So most EU countries use a single currency, which is the euro, and also there's the EU Parliament with laws and regulations that all the countries in the EU have to follow and have to abide. So if you ask me, do you like the EU? You're asking me, do you like those four things? And the thing is, I think some of those four things are really good, and then some of them are not so good. So it really just is a big mix. So I just want to point out Switzerland because it actually managed to get all the good parts of the EU without getting any of the bad parts of the EU. Switzerland is not in the EU, but it is an associate state. That means that there is like free commerce between the EU and Switzerland in most cases. There's no borders, and there's also like freedom of movement, labor rights, and all that. So it is part of the EU in that sense, but it's not part of the EU in the sense that it doesn't have the same custom union as the EU does, so it doesn't have to tax outside products at the same rate, and it also doesn't actually have a say in the EU Parliament, but it also doesn't have to follow the rules that the Parliament actually does. And I think most EU citizens, when you talk to them and they tell you, oh, the EU is great, the reason they think the EU is great is mostly the third point. It's mostly the freedom of movement. It's mostly the freedom of labor, the fact that you can live anywhere, work anywhere, travel without borders. And it is amazing. Like, it truly is so flexible. I was living in Europe and it was just amazing. Like, for the whole year I was there, just being able to travel around. It was hassle-free. Flights were very cheap. Infrastructure was very connected. And that is one thing that the EU definitely did right. But one thing that I'm sure nobody loves is when they go to buy an iPhone or a car and it comes from like outside the EU. Because of the custom union, it's actually more expensive to buy those things. Or for example, when you open a business and you have literally 100,000 regulations that are voted by random people in Brussels that you don't even know about. So, do I like the EU? Yeah, I love the four freedoms. I love the free trade. I love the freedom of movement. I love freedom of people, being able to move around, to work, to retire, to live anywhere they want, to be able to overextend visas because there's no visa for them, obviously, and stay in a country as long as they want. I love that. But I do think it's quite stupid to have a custom union that just makes everything from outside more expensive, and also a giant political structure that makes everything more expensive to the taxpayer through grants, and also very, very bureaucratic through laws that don't really make sense. And then probably the single worst idea was the monetary union. Especially nowadays, you can just travel around the card and you don't even know what currency you're paying. You could like have USD on your card and just pay in euros or pay in pounds or Australian dollars or whatever. So uniting currency for tourism, it doesn't even make it that much easier anymore. And it makes it so much more complicated to the point where Greece is now tied to Germany and Italy is now tied to, I don't know, Portugal in a way that they have never been before. Currency is truly a complicated thing, and to have done that, I mean, it might be irreversible now, but it was a very, very risky and possibly irresponsible thing. And before you say that those things have to be the case, you have to have a political union for a single market, you have to have a currency for free trade. You do not. Like I said, Switzerland, Norway, and Iceland, they do not take part in the EU per se, and they do take the good parts of the EU, but they don't take the bad parts. They don't take the bureaucracy, the rules, the parliament, the custom union. So much so that even though Switzerland is more expensive than the EU in virtually everything because they're just like a wealthier country, you can actually buy technological products in Switzerland for cheaper than most of the EU. It is worth it for a Swiss person to go to the supermarket in Italy, but it is worth it for an Italian to go to Switzerland and buy an iPhone, for example, in most cases. And that is because of the custom union that really sucks it for the EU and makes it countries that are not part of the EU have just much more flexibility.